Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin. Tjong-Alvares with the top reports coming up. India seeks alternative care for its elderly while its economy booms. And Africa's challenge as growth slows. The International Monetary Fund said the global economy remains tepid, with slowdowns in emerging markets offsetting progress in Japan and the EU. In its semi-annual World Economic Outlook, the crisis lender projected 3.5% growth this year, slightly faster than 3.4% in 2014. In 2016, the IMF expects global economic growth to pick up pace to 3.8%. The IMF warned that currency and capital market volatility, geopolitical crises, and inadequate investment and reform could hold the global economy back.
An exit from the euro would be extremely costly for Greece. It would be extremely painful. The second point is that looking at the rest of the Eurozone is in a better position.
China's economy started the year on a gloomy note with its slowest quarterly growth rate since 2009. The 7% first quarter year-over-year growth rate marks a slowdown from 7.3% in the fourth quarter. It further pressures Beijing to ease fiscal and monetary policy. But economic planners are wary of boosting debt that could fuel more overcapacity in real estate and heavy industry. China's National Bureau of Statistics also reported a slowdown in industrial production, fixed asset investment, and retail sales. South Africa and China held bilateral consultations in Pretoria aimed at deepening trade relations and financial cooperation. Total trade between the two countries by end of 2014 amounted to $22 billion, with a trade deficit for South Africa. Africa's second largest economy views investment from China as vital for further industrialization and allowing it to become its own liberator. China's Minister of Foreign Affairs said Beijing regards Africa as a priority in its international industrial capacity and cooperation agenda.
We want to help Africa enhance its independent development capacity through industrial cooperation between the two sides, achieve a technology transfer to Africa, and to help Africa train professionals and talents while preserving and protecting the environment.
Kenyan rights groups spoke out against the government's move to freeze the assets of human rights organizations suspected of financing al-Shabaab. Kenyan authorities last week put two Mombasa-based civil society groups on a list of 85 individuals and organizations accused of supporting the Islamists. The list, which also froze key money transfer companies vital for impoverished Somalia, was part of a crackdown on alleged Shabaab supporters. The terrorist group, which murdered 147 people at Garissa University, also took responsibility for a suicide bombing on Tuesday at Somalia's higher education ministry.
They're all Muslims, or run by Muslims. And so it is difficult for the perception to be avoided that there is some profiling that is going on with regard to the war on terror.
Europe's antitrust regulator plans to file formal charges against Google for violating antitrust laws. The European charges will focus on complaints that Google uses its dominant internet search engine to favor its own services over those of rivals. Google could face fines of over $6 billion, as well as injunctions that require modifying contracts. The case against the internet giant has been under investigation for over 5 years and could become the biggest competition battle since the EU's pursuit of Microsoft a decade ago. As India develops, so does its population and the traditional role families have in taking care of the elderly. Retirement townships are on the rise, but remain a costly option. And while the country's elderly population is set to triple, the government will need to find an economical alternative.
A place of calm in the Indian mountains. A couple of hours from the bustle of Mumbai, this township is home to more than 60 senior citizens. The complex has round-the-clock security and medical care, offering activities and relaxation for a retirement enjoyed in style.
I'm here since 6 years, and I found the place very beautiful, with all the facilities, and I don't regret for coming here. I'm quite happy here. And at this age, I don't think there can be any other better place for me.
The pioneering complex has a range of homes for retirees, with a wing for those who suffer from dementia. Traditionally strong ties within large Indian families mean the elderly are normally cared for by relatives. But the country is developing, youngsters are migrating, and their parents are living for longer. And that means alternatives for the aging are increasingly in demand.
They would far rather, in their twilight years, spend time peacefully in an assisted home. So that's the fundamental change which is now taking place, and therefore there's more demand from the senior citizens of the middle income group and upper middle income group for staying in assisted homes.
Many Indians remain sceptical of such homes, with care for aging parents strongly seen as a child's duty. They're also affordable to just a fraction of Indians. Other senior citizens are struggling in a quickly changing society, in which there's a lack of decent state-run care.
Sometimes the elderly says they've been harassed by their family members. They want to go and stay somewhere out. Sometimes they say we are alone. We want to pass some time. We want somebody to be with us. Sometimes they say we do not have that much of money to spend, so how can we go and stay separately in an old age home?
India's elderly population is set to triple in coming decades, and the country will need to find more economical options to make sure all are well looked after.
We stay with India, but with a slightly different focus. Since Prime Minister Narendra Modi has come to power, India has reached far and wide in hopes of increasing investment. Ties between India and Israel have also been booming, and today's news about the partnership between IT group Tech Mahindra and Converse is the latest sign. We're joined in the studio by Asia business expert Tal Reshev for a look at India's expanding cloud.
Hello.
Mr. Reshev, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So what does this latest deal between Converse and Mahindra Tech mean for India-Israel ties?
Well, it means, first of all, a lot for the Israeli high-tech industry, because we have a very strong, big partner for investment with very deep pockets presented by India. Tech Mahindra is not the first to invest. Well, by the way, it's not the first investment of Tech Mahindra. They've already acquired an Israeli company before that. And Tata has invested a significant sum in developments in Israel before. And these things are progressing, and the more investments are coming to the Israeli high-tech industry, it's good news, of course, for the Israeli.
Is it good news for Converse? I mean, Converse is one of the big stars of the dot-com bubble, essentially, which has been going downhill with all kinds of nightmare stories over the past 15 years. Is this a good thing for Converse? Is it a good thing for Converse employees?
Honestly, it is too early to know. I don't know. Time will tell. Apparently, Tech Mahindra has a very good experience with purchasing companies and putting them on rails to do better performance. So if they're going to do the same thing with Converse, it is going to be good news for the employees.
There are promises of $50 million being invested over the course of 3 years, but then there's also rumors of people being laid off, but I guess that's true for any kind of situation like that.
Yeah, and the rumors, I don't think they're based on any facts. Rumors are rumors. In these cases.
Well, let's move on. Essentially, I mean, how do you see Modi pushing India investments beyond this? What is that significance for India?
It's a lot. It's not only for India. It's for the world economy. I mean, India is the phrase that everybody is talking about for the last 20 years. Everybody is expecting the India to boom, to explode, and things are not yet happening. They were happening in Southeast Asia. They were happening, of course, in China. And it sounds like now, after the election of Narendra Modi, finally somebody is putting the finger on the things that have to be changed. Corruption, nepotism, segregation. Pollution,
I mean, it's one of the biggest stories now in terms of groundwater. I mean, polluted. I mean, essentially, you have China, which is now, of course, flowing, but at least giving lip service to the fact that, oh yeah, we have to take care of the environment. But to what extent is India really doing that and dealing with that? It seems like the focus is really on investment.
Yeah, for the moment, India is not really focusing on the clean tech area. If we take China as an example, China also took time until they got to the point where they were well off enough in order to invest in the environment. India is not yet there. India wants, among the other things that I have pointed out, they want to improve the infrastructure, and they want to improve the rate of production, because for the moment their economy is based first of all on inner consumption and then on services, and they want to produce more and to export more products.
I see. Well, Tal-Reshif, thank you very much for joining us for more in India.
Thank you.
Thank you. Onwards now to Sub-Saharan Africa, where the World Bank said growth is likely to slow to around 4%, the slowest in 20 years. ITV News journalist Daniel Roth reports on what this data might mean for Africa's economic outlook.
This week, the World Bank amended its GDP growth forecast for Sub-Saharan Africa. The change, 4% for 2015, down from 4.5% last year, reflects falling oil prices among other commodities globally. The change also reflects slow growth in much of the West, as well as a slowdown in China.
Since 2008, Africa has continued to grow because China has kept on demanding basic raw materials, and Africa was one of the main exporters of basic commodities after Latin America. But now, even China has gone from a 10% rate of growth to around 7%, which is quite significant in terms of growth shrinkage.
This will put the growth rate at its lowest point in 20 years, according to the Wall Street Journal, which notes that it still sits above the global average of 2.9%. The report also notes that growth should pick back up to 4.5% in 2016.
It's a temporary decline which reflects the lowering of raw materials, but it is not necessarily a long-term decline. That depends on the productivity of these economies and how they adjust, and it is quite possible that the price of oil will increase in the coming years.
The hardest hit are those economies that are the most reliant on oil exports, but ongoing violent conflict in pockets across much of the continent can be a negative factor for those seeking stability, which is key to steady growth.
And even under the most challenging of circumstances, Africa continues to innovate. We're joined now in the studio by ITV News journalist Daniel Roth for a look at what's new in the African network. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
How's it going?
Good. So what is new in Africa?
A lot's new, really. One of the particular points of interest is South Africa, which fell behind on overall GDP to Nigeria. It's become second biggest in Africa. But things are still doing fine there. They're still slated to grow enormously. There's just a study done over the next 15 years. South Africa is going to go from the 31st biggest economy to the 23rd. It's going to be a big deal. Nigeria will be bigger, probably, but South Africa is doing really well. That's on the large scale. When you zoom in a little bit, though, things are tough. It's one of the most unequal societies on earth. Apartheid, the legal system is over, but the economics of discrimination, the economics of oppression still exist.
We still had all those strikes, of course, in the mining industry in South Africa.
But it's interesting, in some of the townships, you're seeing all kinds of innovation pop up. In Khayelitsha, in Cape Town, for example, there's this hub that looks essentially the same as any hub you'd see in Tel Aviv or Barcelona or anywhere, but you look outside and there's 1 million people packed into a small environment. 35% of the people have piped water. That means the rest don't. It's a place that's struggling through poverty, and yet there's these pockets of innovation popping up, really against all odds.
Funded by whom?
These are homegrown things, and this is really the story today for the West. People in Africa have known this for generations, that Africa is the key to changing Africa for the better. People in the West tend to think, well, we need to go in and help. The reality is that these innovations are coming from the ground up.
Do you have an example of an innovation that?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's across the board. There was just actually the Africa Innovation Awards, and something we reported on a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago now, was one South African invention that's quick to test fire alarm that can tell that there's a fire in 20 seconds and get people out of, again, in townships, the close quarters. So it's just an example of a small piece of technology that can save literally thousands of lives. There's also coming from, I believe, Nigeria, if I'm not mistaken. There's a startup working on clean water, on desalinization. So a more local, here in Israel, of course, there's these large-scale projects to salinize water. So the idea here is to make it more local, something that can happen in the home.
Okay, well, I hope to hear more about African innovations. Thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks.
And that concludes our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at i24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Thanks for joining us, and join us again tomorrow for more on the economy.